So let's get going with this. So the first thing is we want to talk about what we can change, because obviously if you're here, you want something to change. So what can we change? And this is an interesting concept here, this idea of people. And I put this up here right at the very beginning based on my experience with live audiences, because one of my first questions when I'm in a live audience and there's opportunity for give and take and feedback and so on and interaction, I ask them, so what is the biggest problem around here with what's going on? And they will say, well, if that person would only change, if they would only do something different, etc. The other thing that I often see is if I talk to a management group or a group of managers and supervisors and say, where's the problem? They will immediately say staff. Staff is the problem. And if I talk to staff, they immediately say management is the problem. So it's interesting that where we assign that to be. So let's look at this. Let's look at this concept of changing people. So this image that just came up, there's male, female. Let's say for the sake of this example that I'm the male figure, the one on the left. This is a little bit hypothetical, but I ask, of those two figures, which do I have control over? And the reality is, the answer is that it's just me. I cannot control the other person. Now, I know there will be some people who are in supervisory or management roles who will, be saying either to themselves or out loud, but it's my job to control people. And it does seem that that's true, and it is our job to influence them and get them to do things. And I'm just going to ask you this, based on your own experience, have you worked with people at any point in time in your career who decided they weren't going to do something and there was no way you could get them to do it? They just would not do it. Or if they did do it, they did it poorly, or they did it in a way that, didn't serve the purpose of what was being done. They did it in practice, but not in principle. So the point that I'm making here is that I'm not saying we shouldn't ever ask people to do so. If they're doing something that is untoward or not supporting the mission and the goals or upsetting people, whatever, of course we ask them to change. The point that I'm making, though, is we go beyond that. We go to a place where we get frustrated with them and they're not changing, and we actually just bring the hammer down harder often. We just try and force them with more force, whatever forces we have available, whether it's HR, discipline, or whatever the case may be, or pleas of getting them to do things. And again, none of those are wrong up until the time that you determine that, okay, this is not going to happen. So maybe it's after the fourth or the fifth or the sixth time, but once you determine that, then stop doing it, because it's just a waste of time and energy. Now, there is places to put our time and energy, so just bear with me for a moment. I'm talking about the places to not at the moment. And the other thing that we do with our time and energy with respect to that, incalcitrant person is we have conversations in our head. Oh, if they would only change, why don't they do that? We on and on and on. And we have those conversations, and we're taking up our bandwidth and our ability to get other things done, and our creativity and our energy, and also not just our mental energy, but our emotional energy. We get frustrated and annoyed and exhausted at it. And that harms us, and it harms our ability to get the job done and produce results, which we are paid for, it turns out. So for all of those reasons, we need to take our attention off that other person. Once it becomes evident that they don't want to do it and they're not going to do it, we take our attention off. The other place where we spend time and energy is not just only dealing with them and not only in our own heads, but with our colleagues and coworkers. We, again, have multiple conversations with them and multiple times, almost not episodically, but chronically. We're chronically talking about them. Oh, if they would just, again, total waste of time and energy. And organizationally, not just individually, but organizationally, you take groups of people who are having these conversations about someone, and there's a lot of time and energy spent that is the organization's is paying for, and meaning that we're not getting results. So I encourage you to shift. And so with that, I'm going to tell you that there are 3 things that we can focus our time and energy on that will produce results. So let me tell you what those are. One of them is ourselves. We can change our own thoughts, our own behaviors, and our own emotions. And I know that one's a little bit challenging, but it's possible. We're not going to get into that in this workshop, but there is, a whole other workshop on how to change our emotions. It's an emotional literacy course, and change how we feel about things. We can do it. So that's one area that we can have impact. We can change, is ourselves. We can't change the other person. Second area is the relationship we have with the other person. And I know this one's sometimes a little bit contentious, and people say, oh, really? I don't think so. But let me give you an example. In this example, I'm a staff person, and my boss is very directive, always giving me directions. Do this, do this, do this, without any opportunity for questions or whatever. And in this case, I know that I'm going to get a directive, and that I already know that I disagree with it. And maybe I disagree on moral or ethical grounds, or just on practical grounds is not going to work, clearly. And so when my boss comes to me, I'm going to give you, or demonstrate basically, two different responses that I could have. I'm not wanting to evaluate which one is right or wrong or better or worse. What we really want to evaluate is, in either of these responses, which one or what impact does each one have on the relationship? And does it draw the person closer to me? Does it create more bond with that person, more friendship, more respect? Or does it tend to push the person away? So here are the two responses, and just evaluate them on that. Closer together, further away. So the first one is, my boss comes to me and says, Michael, I want you to do X. And I say, no, I'm not going to do that. So what happens? Does that make us closer or further? I suggest it pushes us further away. The other one is, boss comes and says, Michael, I want you to do X. And I say, oh, interesting. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I'd really like to understand the thinking behind that. I want to understand that so I can make sure I do a good job at it, or whatever the case may be. I wouldn't add that last part. Just elaborate on it. I suggest that brings us closer. The other person, anytime we ask curious questions, coming from curiosity, real curiosity, not faux curiosity, because people pick up on that, that brings us closer. Oh, that, Michael's interested in my idea and how it came about, etc. So I'm going to encourage you to think about that in your relationships with these difficult people. How do you normally respond? And the problem is, what happens is, because we're annoyed and frustrated and exhausted having to deal with these people, we tend to have responses that come from those emotions, which are annoyed, frustrated types of responses. And often those responses push us further away rather than closer together. So evaluate how you're responding to these difficult people. Oh, and I guess I usually want to say, when I bring this screen up, I want to address this concept here that I know many of you came here because you have to deal with these difficult people and you're annoyed and frustrated and exhausted, and yet what I'm saying here is you're not going to be able to change them. And I know many of you came hoping that I would have some silver bullet that would show you how you could change those people, and that would be done, and then your life would be amazing thereafter. And I want to address right now, that's not going to happen. We will show you how you can interact and engage with those people, but it's not going to be a silver bullet. And the bad news is that much of the onus is going to be on you. And the reason is because we can't change other people. So they're probably not going to change things about themselves just because we ask them. However, if we want things to be better, we can have things better. And the way forward on that is to change the way that we think and act, communicate, behave, etc. Okay, so three things I was saying. One is ourselves. The other is the relationship, how we relate to that person, how we communicate, interact with them, emails, texts, all of those things. And then the third thing we can change is our environment. And if you're a C-suite person, you can probably change the environment in the whole organization. Manager, you could, change your team or whatever it is, your manager or regional manager, whatever it is. You can have influence over that. If you're a staff person, sometimes staff people ask you, well, like, what can I change? I can't change the environment. And it seems like that on the surface. So let me present another example of where we can do that. And it's what I call the microenvironment. So just the environment around us, not the greater environment. That's for people with the more organizational power and authority. And if we don't have that, we can change our microenvironment. So you've probably been in a situation at some point in time in your life where you have been in a training room or lunchroom or whatever, and there's 8 to 10 people in there. And they've been together for a while, and they're chatting. And you could measure the emotional tone subjectively. You could say, yeah, the tone is about a 7 or an 8, or maybe it's a 4 because everybody's in there and complaining and grousing, and so whatever it is, it's somewhere you could measure it. You could put it on a scale. What is the emotional tone, with 10 being positive and 1 being negative? Somewhere in there, wherever it is. And then one person walks in, and whatever it is that they say or do, or even the energy that they bring with them, changes the tone of that environment. Up or down, doesn't matter. My point is, I'm demonstrating here that one person can change the environment where there's 8 to 10 people in that environment. So if everybody's grousing and somebody comes in and kind of reframes things, or makes legitimately something humorous, or gets them to see what they've been grousing about in a different way, that can lift the environment up. If it was a 4, it might go up to a 5 or maybe even a 6. The point being, we can change the environment. Or if it's a 7 and people are just being collegial, and someone comes in with a lot of fun and balloons and excitement, they could raise it up, or they could come in and them grouse and complain and so on, which could bring the environment down. And it doesn't always. My point is that it can, and therefore it's worth putting time and energy into if we're looking for some kind of change. That's one thing we can change. So the 3 things are ourselves, the way we relate to that other person, and the environment around us, our microenvironment at least, or microculture. So those are the 3 things that we want to focus on when we think about what can we change. And I present that right at the very beginning to kind of give you a framework to start thinking about, oh, okay, I want change to happen. So what is it that I want to change, or how do I want to go about this change? All right, so that kind of is the frame that we want to continue on here. So let's talk about communications here. Because one of the chief ways that we interact with people is about communications. And I'm going to suggest that what makes people difficult is that is often to do with the way that we communicate. Often some of it is the way that they think, which we'll get into, that we have different worldviews and different ways of seeing things. It could be someone who has real strong religious convictions, and someone who maybe is spiritual, and then someone else who is none of the above, and those 3 may have challenges, or people who's very progressive and another one very conservative. They may have challenges with each other, different ends of the spectrum. Nobody right or wrong, just we see the world differently. So with that in mind, then it really becomes down to how those things are communicated with each other as well. And so I have this model here, which we call the assertive communications. It's assertive scale. And I want to talk about where people are on this. And what I want you to think about is the 2 people, as we talk about this. I want you to think about where you might fall on here, and where you think one or more of the people that you find challenging or difficult to deal with fall on here, just to see if this might be one of the areas that are challenging for you. So at the very left end are people we would describe as passive, passive presentation. They're not necessarily passive people per se. They could have some very strong, opinions and convictions and values, and yet their presentation is more passive. And then at the other end are people who tend to be more aggressive in their presentation. And then somewhere in the middle, we have people who are assertive. So, one of the questions is, where's the best place to be on this scale? And I'm going to demonstrate you the answer. And the answer is often not intuitive. When I ask this in front of live audiences and I get feedback, I get, many people say, well, somewhere around 5 or 4 to 6. And that objectively, that does seem like it's the right place to be. And yet, if the results we want to get are that we want to be able to communicate well with people, to be heard, and we want to be understood, that's not necessarily the best place to be. And I'll demonstrate this to you as we go forward. But the best place to be actually is closer to where the other person is. And I know some of the objections that I hear when I say that immediately is, well, why do I have to change? And yeah, I mean, I get it. That's unfair. It's unfair that we have to change. And yet, we're not going to get the other person to change. So if we're going to have better relations, if we're going to have better communications, better understanding, somebody has to change, because someone at a 9 cannot hear someone who's at a 1. They dismiss them. They just go, I'm not even going to talk to that person. They're too slow. They're too hesitant. That's how a 9 assesses a 1. And on the other hand, a 1 can't hear a 9 because they feel intimidated. You know, that person's a bully. They're just intimidating me. And again, I'll get into more detail on this. The point that I want to make, and want you to think about as we're talking about these communications, is that the strategy is to move closer. The winning strategy, if you will, the effective strategy is to move closer to the other person, move up and down the scale. We'll talk about how to do that as well, but just keep that in mind as we're talking about this. So what are some times where it's useful to be passive? Because neither passive nor aggressive nor assertive is something that is consistent. It's not ubiquitous in every situation. You can't say we should be assertive in every situation or passive or aggressive. Now, each of us have our own comfort zones around that and our own ways that we've become familiar with doing it, but that doesn't mean that it's going to get us the best results, because we're talking about getting results with other people here, not just making ourselves comfortable, which, you know, of course, we tend to do when we want to do. So some of changing is going to feel uncomfortable for some people, and yet it's worthwhile if you want to be heard and have better relationships with people. Okay, so let's talk quickly here about what some situations are where it's useful to be passive. I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about the mindset of people who are passive. They tend to think about in terms of I'm not okay. So passive people were more likely to be thinking that they're not okay. They look at it as I lose, you win. So they see themselves as getting taken advantage of. They often think that others are more important than them. So that, you know, I would often hear in a would be in a meeting. I spend a lot of my consulting time in meetings with people within my client organizations, and I'd often hear somebody come up to me afterwards and say, I really wish we had talked about X. And I will say, and this is usually someone who's more passive, because someone who's on the aggressive end of the scale wouldn't wish about it. They just make it happen. They'll come to me and say, I wish we had talked about X. And I will say to them, oh, okay, well, yeah, I think so too. Why didn't you bring it up? And they say, oh, well, we were having these other discussions, and I just, I didn't know if this was important. It was good, for the whole group, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the mindset. And the reason that I'm presenting this is if you are on one or either end of the scale or wherever you are on the scale and you want to move and you want to be able to be more flexible, and that's really what this is all about, is when you get flexible, then you can begin to connect with more people and not have these situations where you aren't heard or they're not heard or whatever. You need to be able to move up and down the scale, and part of that will be getting over your own mindset. Challenge yourself. If you hear yourself thinking to yourself that, oh, I don't know if I should ask this question or not because I'm not sure whether other people it'll be interest to other people. What you're actually saying is that their thoughts and ideas are more important than yours. So you have to challenge yourself on that if you want to move. I'm not saying you have to do that if you don't want to. Often people on the passive end will withhold their feelings of expression. They won't talk about their exhaustion, their frustration, or their annoyance, etc. And then they often will tell me, again, after meetings where things they didn't get their needs met, they'll feel like, oh, so-and-so was controlling the conversation. And that so-and-so is usually someone who's at higher end of the scale, you know, an 8 or a 9 or something like that. So they have feelings of being controlled. And again, I'm not saying any of this is right or wrong. It's just, it is, and it impacts our results. So it's your choice whether you want to do something about it to change it. And if you change it, I can tell you that you will change your results. I've dealt with thousands of people, and those of people who do begin to change both their thinking and their behaviors, they end up with different results. Sometimes the results in the short term aren't better, they're just different, but if we do it over a period of time, we will end up getting better results by being able to change. And then the last one is tend to be seen as indecisive. And really that almost circles back to the one where others are more important. Often when I dig down on the people who are looking like they're indecisive, what we find out is that they weren't necessarily indecisive, they just put, they downplayed the importance of their idea or making the decision in the way that they would want to, or they have a fear of making a decision and making a mistake or looking bad. So again, if you're in that category and you've self-assessed yourself in that category, take a look at some of these thoughts. And these thoughts I'm going to suggest to you are to some degree controlling you. And they may not be true in every situation. It may be very situational. It may be when you're just with that person that seems like an 8 or a 9 that these thoughts and feelings begin to take over and impact and drive how you deal with that person. So what I just said about these thoughts, etc., is true for all three, both passive, assertive, and aggressive. So let's talk about aggressive. They tend to think you're not okay. So they think I'm okay, you're not okay. So what my thinking on this is the right way, it's the only way. And if you're an aggressive person, I'm going to suggest to you that that is the thought process that you have. And again, I'm not making it right or wrong. It just is. And you can choose that if you want to have better relations with people who are lower on the scale, then that's something to look at and possibly address. Again, there's a diminishing of others. So it's a kind of my ideas are more important, my ideas are better. People who are at the 7, 8, 9 on the scale will often just say that out loud. And again, you know, that's their thinking. They have a right to have it. And I'm just going to suggest to those of you that have it that it may be impairing your ability to have more collegial conversations with people at the other end of the scale. They tend to think in the I win, you lose, so the zero-sum games, not so much in the, and by the way, passive think is that way as well, only it's I lose, you win. They tend to be seen as controlling. They want to get things, they want to have things done their way, without a doubt. And they tend to make choices for others. And again, it sounds like this is, there's something like there's some character flaw. That's not the case. What happens often with people who are aggressive is they're very decisive and they make decisions very, very quickly. And they're very directive. They tell people what to do because they think, hey, this is the way to do it. This is the right way. It's clearly, I have all the evidence that I need. This is the way to go. And if someone says, I don't think so, it seems to people who are aggressive that that's just a waste of time to have this conversation about this other way because the path forward is clear. So let's not talk about these side paths or whether we should do this or dither around about that. Just go, you know. And so making choices for others, if others are taking too much time deliberating or thinking about it, the people at the more aggressive end of the scale are just going to make those choices and go, yep, nope, it's this. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're ordering for dinner. You know, here's where we're going for dinner, whatever the case may be. I'm using sort of personal situations, but you've probably experienced those. And then isn't as aware, I say doesn't respect, but really isn't as aware of the rights of others. And in fact, and I guess I would say the reason that for it seems to be, again, based on conversations that I have with people who are on the aggressive end of the scale, it's not so much that they don't see it as the rights of others. They actually just see it as you know, if those other people aren't going to stand up for what they want, then they lose, and that's their problem. That's not my problem if they don't stand up for it. I can't stand up for them and for myself. If this is important to them, then they would stand up for it. If they're not standing up for it, the message that I take from that is that that's not important to them. So again, for people at the lower end of the scale, we can see this as very difficult behavior. When people are at the higher end of the scale, people 7s, 8s, or 9s, they do not see it as very difficult behavior, and it isn't. If they were all 7s and 8s or 9s in the world, everybody would get along with that. So it's not wrong for them to be doing that. It's just the fact that we live in a more diverse world where people are at different places, and so it doesn't work as well. So it's not right or wrong, it doesn't work as well. And then let's go with the assertive. So people who are assertive think that everybody's okay. You know, you're okay, I'm okay, no matter what. Having said that, though, they not on that scale, if they're like in a 4 to 6, they don't necessarily, they in theory think that the 9s and 1s and 2s are okay. They're not going to try and change anybody, and they're not going to move towards them either because they think that they're okay where they are. So we still don't get good conversations and good understanding because they're not moving towards where the other person is. They're very supportive of other people, generally. They tend to be very collaborative, and they want collaboration. The problem that happens for people who are on the assertive end of the scale is they're very good at being collaborative with people who are also assertive, and yet the collaboration doesn't work as well for them when there's a 9 or a 2 in the room. Because when there's a 9 or a 2 in the room, the 9 or the 2 are not going to collaborate very well, not because they don't want to, but because they have a style difference, and that is a barrier. But the assertive are not necessarily good at getting the 2 and the 9 to come together, because in order to do that, you'd have to move in some ways closer to the 9 to get the 9 to hear you, and then closer to the 2. You need to be flexible, and people who are stuck in that 4 to 6 zone aren't able to do that. They do like to build consensus, again, get everybody on board. They're very good at hearing everybody's ideas, etc. And there are barriers to that when there are people at far reaches of the scale. They tend to be respectful of others and themselves. Having said that, that's actually one of the reasons why they don't move towards the other person, is because they sometimes see being overly passive as disrespectful, that you're not communicating in a way that others do, and they see the same thing of aggressive people. So they tend to stay in their own zone. So, and then the last one is they do play win-win. They're always looking for everybody to win, and that can actually be a barrier too, because sometimes the best solution that can be found will maybe only serve 95% of the people, or maybe it'll only serve 90% of the people. And yet we've bandied about this problem forever, trying to get a solution to it, and the best we can do is 90% of the people. At some point in time, maybe that's the right decision to make, and that yes, 10% of the people it might not work for, but it does work for 90. So maybe that's the decision, but assertive people will often hold on to making a decision, trying to forestall it until they can get 100%, which doesn't always work. So the point that I'm making with this is that none of these, as I said, are right or wrong, and none of them work in every situation. So that means if we want to be a good communicator, we want to get along with all different types of people, then it's really incumbent upon us to learn the skill of being able to move up and down. And part of the skill set is overcoming our own mindset about being collaborative and about winning and losing and respect, etc. And part of that is just in our heads. And so once we can kind of deal with what's in our own heads about this, then we can start moving up and down the scale. And I'm going to give you some specifics about what that looks like, because I know that sounds just a little bit kind of ephemeral about how do we move up and down. But it's really actually way simpler than anybody thinks on the surface. Okay, so here we go. So we talk about this, and really these are just differences in styles. And most of us have learned our style often early in our development. Like when we were young, I know I have two children, two boys that are now 23 and 25 years old. From the time that they were infants, they had different style differences. So maybe some of it is nature, some of it is nurture. In any case, these are just differences that people have, but they are just styles. It's not about who they are as a human being. It's just styles that they use. So here are some of the different styles that we can use, and I'm going back to this scale again. So different what they call modalities, so modes. And there's really three. There's the body, and then there's the voice, and there are the words. And the percentages at the side come from research that was done about 30, 40 years ago now on communications and which of these modes had the most impact on the communications. Now, the research was done on people who were live in, face-to-face with each other, not on the phone or by text or whatever. And there's been more recent research that kind of puts into question whether these percentages are absolutely accurate or not. So don't go exactly by these percentages, or if you see them elsewhere, know that they're not absolutes and that there are variables situationally, etc. However, having said all of that, I'm going to demonstrate to you and prove to you that the most important mode or modality in communications is body language when we are face-to-face with another person. The next most important is voice. And of course, if we're on the phone, then voice is almost the most important. It might be up at 90% almost. And that words are not as important. And I know it seems like, oh, maybe words are important, but I want to give you, I'll demonstrate to you, but I also want you to understand this, is that our brains have evolved over many, many years, and there was as big a period of our brains evolving before we had language as there has been after we've had language. And our brains are one part of our brain that receives incoming messages. Part of its real goal actually is to protect the organism, which is us. And its job is to protect. So it's always scanning for threats in our environment. Because humans have always been social species. We've always worked together, even as hunter-gatherers. We were in groups of gatherers and groups of hunters. It was a group experience. And it was really, really important for our brains to be able to perceive any threats. Not the big ones like the saber-toothed tigers and the snakes and fire and floods and things like that, but even micro threats or micro expressions that might indicate a threat, like someone's facial expression or the way that they're holding their body. They may stiffen up when they're walking out in the field. If they stiffen, that might mean there's a snake or some other threat there. And so our brains at a very subconscious level are highly attuned to all of those micro expressions that happen within our bodies, which is why the body language when we're face-to-face with people is so important. So let me give you an example, and this works admittedly much better when we're standing in front of each other and you can see what I'm doing, but I just want you to picture somebody that you know that does, speaking or makes presentations. Think of them standing up at the front of the room or in front of a group of people making a presentation. And what I'm going to demonstrate to you is I'm going to say the same thing 4 different times, that I want you to see how the person's body is positioned 4 different ways when I'm saying these things. So think about the person that you are thinking about envisioning, and think of them standing up at the front of the room with their arms just relaxed at their side, and they say to the room, "Oh, great to see so many of you here today." Now vision them with their hands on their hips and saying, "Oh, great to see so many of you here today." Now see them with their arms crossed over their chest, still relaxed, but arms crossed, and saying, "Oh, great to see so many of you here today." And then the last one is they have their arms outspread wide, like in the Titanic, I'm the king of the world pose. And they say, "Oh, great to see you here today. Great to see so many of you here today." So I tried to use exactly the same tone and exactly the same words and speed, etc. Voice quality exactly the same. and yet the visual of the body would be different. So again, this is easier when we're in front of a group. Almost 100% of the time when I do that live, people say they interpreted my message different based on my body. But based on my body language, they interpreted what I meant or my intention. So therefore, the words are exactly the same. So what was the most important quality there, or the most important modality was the body. And it's just true over and over again. I can demonstrate it. So the body is the most important piece. So the reason that I bring this forward is that if we want to be able to move up and down the scale, we can do it just by changing things that we do with our bodies. We can move. We can go closer to a 1, closer to a 10. Or we can do it with our voice as well. And if we do it with both voice and body, then it's more realistic or believable to other people. And also we want to have the words. Like if you're saying a word that's kind of a harmful or disparaging word, but you've got a smile on your face, people don't believe you. They believe the words, not the smile. You can try and smile and cover it up, but it's not going to work. And on the other hand, if you're saying, loving and words that are, ideally to uplift, but you've got a scowl on your face, people are going to believe the scowl, not the words. So we'll get into more detail about actually how to do this. I just wanted to present them here first. So the idea, what I'm just talking about here, is the message is more powerful when we are 100% congruent. So if our body matches our voice and matches our words, then people are going to believe us. They're going to hear us and they're going to believe us. If our body doesn't match our voice and our words, then people are not going to believe us. They're going to believe what they see our body doing. Or if our voice sounds hesitant or extra squeaky or something like that, and we're saying, no, really, trust me, you got to trust me. I'm not trusting that, No, those are the words, but I'm not going to trust it. That doesn't sound like you're trustworthy. So be very aware of that, but also be aware of it in other people, because our brains, when there's an incongruency like that, our brains perceive that as a threat. And so some of the people that we find difficult to deal with, it could quite easily be because their presentation is incongruent, or parts of their presentation are incongruent with the words that they're saying. And so our brain perceives that as a threat. Oh no, there's a threat out there. And then we find that person difficult. And then we get, it becomes hard to deal with them and hard to, we don't know how to respond to them because we're feeling threatened. Okay, so let's go with what are all the things that we can do with our body and our voice and our words to move up and down that scale. So I presume that at least some of you bought into my hypothesis that it's beneficial to learn how to move up and down. It's just a skill set. Again, as I said, we have to get our minds out of the way a little bit because we think in certain ways depending on where we naturally fall on the scale and the behaviors that we've habituated. But in any case, so let's talk about our body. What are the things we can do with our body? Well, the proximity, how close we are to the other person. Some of you have probably seen the Seinfeld episode of the Close Talker. The actor was Judge Reinhold, and he would get really close to people and talk really close to them. And if you think about have yourself in that situation where you've had somebody get too close to you, what begins to happen is you can't hear them because you're focused and your brain is focused on the threat, and you're focused on, like, what's wrong with them? Why are they standing so close? What's going on? And you can't actually hear what they're saying. You don't process and register what they're saying because of that. So, and the same is true if someone's too far away from you. Like why are you way over there? I can't hear you. I can't feel you, sort of thing. Hands and arms. We already talked about that. The moving of hands and arms, and some people talk with their hands and so on. And those things, if often people from Mediterranean and South American cultures do use their hands a lot, maybe more Mediterranean and South American, they use their hands a lot to talk. And if you're if you're working on communicating with them and you're not using their hands, that's actually a distraction for them. whereas them swinging, moving their hands around a lot could be a distraction for you if you're not used to it. So there's distractions that take us away from the message and make it difficult to deal with the people. Another one is what we call orientation. So as an example, think about moving up and down the scale. A very aggressive way to when you're orienting yourself with someone is to stand directly facing them. So if you think about two people who are facing each other, posting up against each other basically, and maybe they're in a little bit of a confrontation or something, that's a very confrontational pose. So if you're squared up to somebody, that's intimidating. That's at the 8 or 9 end of the scale. Think about it if you just turn your shoulders maybe 5 or 10 degrees away from that, stance, that softens things a little bit. That moves you down to a 6 or a 7. Then if you turn it 45 degrees and maybe open up one foot pointing 45 degrees away from where the other foot is. In our animal history, when we were less civilized, that shows a vulnerability, which then softens things to other people. And so if your goal is to move down the scale, then you would open up. If your goal is to move up the scale, and sometimes there are times to be more assertive and more aggressive, then you square up with the other person. None of these, again, are right or wrong. They're just ways of moving up and down the scale, which is beneficial to understanding and communications. Facial expressions. So frowning and smiling and lifting an eyebrow and even blinking or nose flaring, all of those types of things our brains pick up on and make an assessment of and make it easier or harder for us to communicate with that person. And then eye contact. And this is the one that really demonstrates it for me. I mean, the hands one will demonstrate it pretty well, but the eye contact. When I'm doing this live with my corporate clients, what we will do is I will bring someone up to the front of the room who's a 3 or a 4 and someone who's a 7 or an 8 up to the front of the room. And I have given them a script to memorize and give everybody the script. It's basically just like 2 lines. Great weather we're having today. Hope it lasts through the weekend. Something like that. So 2 lines, easy to remember. I bring the 8 and the 9 up to the 8, 9, or and the 3, 4 up to the front of the room. Have them stand at a comfortable distance from each other, facing each other, and then I have them deliver that line to each other. And what happens is the 8 or the 9 makes sustained eye contact with the 3. We'll say an 8 and a 3. So the 8 makes sustained eye contact with the 3, and the 3 will not look at the 8, not in any sustained way. They're looking around, and every once in a while they'll glance at them, but mostly they're looking at the floor and the ceiling and everywhere else but at the eyes of the 8. So here's where it gets really instructive, because I will say to the 8, why don't you just look away? Try looking away. So the 8 will look away momentarily, and then they'll have to look back. And then on the other hand, I say to the 3, why don't you try and make some sustained eye contact? And the 3 will try it, but only for a short period of time, and then they have to look away. Here's where it gets really instructive, or one of the areas, is I asked the 8, so what happened when you looked away? And they said they felt vulnerable. They didn't really trust the other person, so they had to look at them. I asked the 3 why they didn't keep looking at the 8, and they say, interestingly enough, exactly the same thing. They felt vulnerable in that situation looking at them, and they felt intimidated, and they didn't trust the other person. So it's interesting that the motivations or the reasons behind it were exactly the same for the 8 and the 3. They didn't feel vulnerable, but they used very different tactics. One had to make eye contact and one couldn't. And that goes to our emotions and our mindset. So my point here is, if you have somebody in your world that is difficult, and they're not toxic but just merely difficult, then try some of these strategies of moving closer to them. Try and figure out how to move closer to them. And don't try and do it all at once. It's a skill set. Just pick one of these, figure out which it is. Eye contact is a really powerful one. And also, facial expressions. Notice, do they scowl? Do they frown? Have they got their face kind of in a hard face? Are they soft and open and accepting. And if we can shift the way we use our face and expressions, then we can put them more at ease. They're not going to feel as vulnerable, and we can have better communications. So eye contact's probably the most powerful one, and facial expressions as well. And they're both relatively easy to do. You just either make more or less eye contact, kind of closer to where they are. Model and mirror what they're doing. All right, so let's get into what we can do with the voice. There's 4 Ps: pitch, which I include volume in there, pace, how quickly people talk. And this is a classic one where I see that a great example of how moving up and down the scale can get us better relations with people and get better communications happening. Because people who are at 8 or 9 tend to speak very quickly, kind of like I am right now, and they don't put a lot of pauses in, so they don't hardly even to breathe. So other people, it seems, can't get a word in edgewise, and yet another 8 would just jump in anywhere, and they would, it would work. But people who are 3 or 4s don't want to jump in. On the other hand, people who are 3 or 4s tend to be, I'm just going to demonstrate here a little. They have, way longer pauses in their, presentation, and they search for words and things like that. And so what happens is when the 3 is doing that, the 8 gets impatient and just jumps in and finishes their sentence for them or tells them what they think that they were about to say. And then the 3 gets annoyed by that, but can't really overcome it. And on the other hand, when an 8 is going on the way they're going, the 3 will say to me, well, I couldn't get a word in edgewise, And so either way, they're both not communicating with each other, and yet they're doing what seems completely natural and normal to each of them. So you have to jump in. And I'll say this at this point in time. I mean, if you put 2 8s in a room together, they'll be, flailing their arms, banging the table, probably raising their voice, speaking very fast, interrupting each other. And, a 3, if you show that to a 3's looking at that going, oh, there's no way I'd step into that lion's den. And yet when you ask the 8s about it afterwards, you go, hey, man, that looked pretty intense. And they go, oh, no, that was just, we just had a good conversation, man. We exchanged ideas. It was really invigorating. So for the 8s, that's invigorating, great exchange of ideas. They love being in that environment. And then the 3s don't want anything to do with it, So again, not right or wrong, just so different. And if we want to communicate with everybody, we need to be able to adapt to where those other people are. The next one in voice is power of the 4 Ps. Power is, I have a friend who is an actor and both acts on the stage and in front of the camera. And he tells me that, when you're in front of an audience, you have to push your power out more into the audience than you do to the camera. So it's like in the military, they have something that's called command presence. Anybody ever saw the movie with Jack Nicholson, just lost A Few Good Men? And when he's sitting on the witness stand, or even earlier on when they're at the base and he's hosting them for breakfast, there is absolutely no question who is in control of that. It's just, it's the way he talks, it's command presence. There's a little bit of body in that, but there's a lot of it just in his voice and his delivery of what he's saying. So that's what we talk about when we talk about power. And the last one is passion. Our passion comes through in our voice. And the best example I can give of that, if you think about ever been to a town hall meeting or somewhere where people are standing up to a mic to comment on whatever, something, And think about this. Have you ever had someone who got up to the mic and they were way overly passionate about whatever the thing is? Maybe the thing was kind of a little bit innocuous or really not that big of a deal, but they were just so passionate about it. My question to you is, what happened after a period of time? What did you do? And the answer is often, I tuned out. I didn't listen to them because their passion was too great for the occasion. It didn't match. They were incongruent. And then on the other end of the scale, have you been in that same situation where someone came to the mic about something that was really, really important, at least to you, And they were very dispassionate about it, and this ended up boring you to death. And what did you do after a period of time? Yep, you tuned them out. So again, the point is that we will tune out and not hear and not listen to people who aren't on the same place as we are on the scale. So let's talk quickly about some words that we can use. We'll do it quickly because they're less important generally. We can use softeners if we want to move down on the scale, such as instead of saying, you know, do it this way, say, this is an example of a softener. One could say, I wonder if you would give some consideration to doing it this way. So again, if you want to move up the scale, you say, do it this way. If you want to move down the scale, you might say, I wonder if you would give some consideration to. Open, being more open to feedback and comment, etc. So part of that is words like, you know, consider, not do. Those are different words that are used to signal where we are on the scale or where other people will see us on the scale. Yeah, so the closed words is do this, and the open word is consider this. Or declaratives. It is this way, as opposed to, again, if you want to be assertive, you say, you know, this is the way it is, that's it, this is how I see it, blah, blah, blah. Or if you want to move down, say, you know, it appears, it looks like it's this way, or the evidence seems to suggest that it's this way. Again, I'm not saying either of these are right or wrong. I just want to give, I'm giving you the different ends of the spectrum so you can choose what it is that you want to, how you want to use language to move up and down the scale if you choose to do that. Okay. The last one is by asking questions. Instead of telling, which is the declarative, ask a question. So saying, doing it this way, say, how do you think you might start this project? Instead of saying, hey, here's the first thing you need to do on the project, you could ask, how do you see your, how do you think you're going to start this project? Or what do you think is the first step for you? Something like that. All right, so situations to be more passive we'll talk about. When we're training or teaching someone, it's better to start down a little bit slower. I'm now up to probably about a 6 or a 7 people would evaluate at, but I started out a little bit lower. I started out at about a 4 or 5, so under. When we're empathizing with people and their emotions and saying, oh, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. It doesn't work to say, oh, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. That's not going to work, you know. When we're in active listening mode. In active listening mode, there's many components to it. We won't go into all of them, but basically it's hearing what the person's saying. It's acknowledging what the person's saying. It's acknowledging them and letting them know that you're hearing what they're saying by feeding back and so on. But a time to be more at the passive end is often in those situations. When we're trying to promote initiatives, we're trying to get people on board with initiatives. Times to be more aggressive is when we need to get their attention. You know, if there's an emergency or something, if you're in a room of people and it's time to, you know, end the break and so on, you want to, say, okay, people, pay attention, let's go. So yeah, those are times to make sure that you're being heard. Sometimes if people aren't hearing you because of distractions or whatever, it's okay to escalate. That might work. I'm not saying it's going to work in every case, but it might work. To reinforce the importance of something, to make sure people understand the relevance and importance. And when we're giving directives, it's okay to be more aggressive if you're not looking for feedback. As a matter of fact, if you want to shut feedback down or questions, then be more assertive and you'll get less questions often. Times to be more aggressive, I should say. Times to be more assertive. When we're trying to collaborate with people, we're trying to bring everybody's ideas together. When we're trying to build consensus, get everybody, to agree to do things in the same way. Collaboration is bringing a variety of ideas together, and then the consensus building is getting people to agree on what ideas or the way forward, sort of thing. Let's see. When we're trying to understand other people's perspectives, if we're too passive, we let them talk, and then we may not ask questions. If we're too aggressive, then we ask too aggressive questions, and it might shut them down from sharing with us. So assertive is a better place to be. when we're trying to demonstrate respect for people, that usually falls into this category better, or this area on the spectrum. And then when we're trying to develop two-way communications, obviously people who are too aggressive tends to be a one-way communication, mostly with them doing the talking. People who are too passive also tends to be a one-way communication with the other people doing the talking. So if we're looking for a two-way communication, we need to be assertive to facilitate that happening. Okay, so now I'm going to just talk a little bit more about, these are more personality styles of difficult people. And I often find that when I'm doing this live, that there's a lot of ahas for people in this presentation right here. We've got about 20 minutes, and we'll go through this and different personality styles. And some of you may be familiar with things like Myers-Briggs Personality Type Indicator, or Preview, or DISC, or Colors. Those are all personality style inventories, instruments to determine personality style. Almost all of them are based on the psychologist Carl Jung and his theories about archetypes and so on, and he divided people into 4 categories, and so it's based on his work. And I've been qualified to administer a few of those over the years, and from my experience with that, I don't want to say that those instruments aren't useful, but mostly what they do is they spend a lot of time, or there's a lot of the majority of the instrument is about understanding ourselves, which is very valuable to be able to do that. What I found with my work, with my clients, is that was also equally or maybe even more valuable is to understand, when we understand ourselves, and how we can then work with, or not work, or the barriers to working with other styles. So many of them, like Myers-Briggs and Colors and so on, ultimately divide people into 16 different categories. So 4 different, and then they subdivide within those 4 into 4 other ones. I want to simplify it so that we can just use it really easily here today. We're just going to use 4 different quadrants. And the goal of this is to be able to quickly identify what quadrant somebody else fits into. Now, this is not a clinical tool, and we're not going to use it for clinical purposes. It's just used to be able to communicate and relate to other people really easily, you know? So the idea here is, if we can identify where other people are, what quadrant that they fall in, and if we can identify what quadrant we fall in, then we can adapt what are habituated or more comfort zone type responses to them, and then we're going to have better connections with them. So it's basically identify, adapt, and then connect with them. So we'll start out here with these axes, horizontal and vertical. And what I want you to do, again, it would be helpful if you think of 2 different people here, yourself and one other person that you find a challenge. And we'll see if we can identify maybe where some of that challenge with that person comes from. And so, again, we'll use this scale. We're talking about this is very similar to the assertive scale. And at the left hand, we have people who are more introverted, or you might see as more passive. And on the right, people who are more extroverted or more aggressive. And then at the left, people who are more guarded and indirect, and other people who at the other end who are more open and direct. And so see if you can find yourself and the other person somewhere along that scale. None of us are wholly at one end or the other, or very few of us. We're usually somewhere along there, but just see if you can figure out where to position or where to plot where you would be and where that other person would be. And then on the vertical axis, we have people at the top who are very task-oriented. They just want to get to the job, get going, let's get to work. And then people at the bottom who are more relationship-oriented or people-oriented. So a great example of that is that if a team is given a new project to do, and they get all the information they need on how to do the project from their supervisor, and then the supervisor says, okay, go. What's going to happen is people who are extreme at the top, they're going to just run to wherever their workstation is or wherever and get to work on it right away. They're probably not even going to make any plans per se. They're just going to get to work. They have all the information they need to get started. Whereas those who are more oriented towards relationships and people, they're going to start having conversations with each other. They're going to talk about it. They're going to think about making some plans and how are we going to do this and who are we going to include and who's going to do what, you know, divide the tasks up, all of those kinds of things. Two very different orientations and ways. Now, nobody is all of one or all of the other, of course. Then also people at the top tend to be more formal in many ways, in their communication, in their dress, and then people at the bottom are less formal, you know, informal. So someone at the top might come into work and say, hey, good morning, Michael. How are you doing? And at the bottom go, hey, Michael, what's shaking? You know, very different. People at the top, more structured in their clothing, more conservatively colored, typically, you know, blacks and grays and so on. Down on the bottom, florals and bright, and with females, lots of makeup and jewelry and big jewelry, and not as structured, you know, so different places along that spectrum. So again, see where you plot yourself and in the other person. And so if you plot yourself to the right of the midline on the horizontal axes, and you plot yourself to above the midline on the vertical axes, then that would put you in the top right quadrant, and that's probably your dominant personality style, okay? So plot where you are and the other person and see which quadrant they fall into, and then I'm going to give you some characteristics of those styles and just see if those characteristics match up with your experience of yourself and that other person, okay? Alrighty, so let's get started here. Top left quadrant. This is what I used the word color energies instead of like the Myers-Briggs and so on. They use letters, and other ones use labels like directive and socializer, etc. I don't like those labels because then that gives, well, people a label. Blue, red, green, and yellow are a little bit more innocuous. And I also call it energies as opposed to personality style. My experience is that we all have all of the energies within us and that we just express those energies situationally. We may express one energy way more than the others, but that doesn't mean we don't ever express the other ones. So think about this also, about how you might express each of the different energies. So the blue energy, top left, and they're kind of, their modus operandi or their way of being is basically their most important driving factor is to get it right. They want to make sure things are right. They have to make a choice between getting it right or getting it done. They'll get it right and not get it done. And you'll say to them, hey, you didn't get it done. And they go, no, but I got it right. Accuracy, precision, those things are really important. Red energy, on the other hand, in the top right quadrant, red energy is all about getting it done. And if they have to choose between getting it done and getting it right, they're going to get it done, even though it may not have been up to a standard. And you say to them, it didn't meet the standard. They go, no, but I got it done. And then they might say, well, and I got it done so quickly, because they move very, very quickly. I got it done so fast that I now have time to go back and correct it if need be. They'll sometimes debate whether them missing the standard is really that important or not. But if it turns out that it is, they'll go back and fix it. And they will probably get it done before many of the other people would have gotten it done. Certainly probably more than blue. And I'm not saying none of these are right or wrong, and I'm not making a value judgment. They're all necessary, they're all needed, all of these energies, and we all have all of them. And we can bring them to bear if we want to, and I'll talk a little bit more of that in a moment. Green energy is all about getting along. They want everybody to get along. They don't like conflict, and they want consensus and want people to collaborate. And it's really a lot about feelings and emotions for green energy. And I'm just giving you the big picture right here. And yellow is about getting noticed. And it's not necessarily about them getting noticed per se, although that can be part of it. But more importantly for them, they have big ideas and big plans, and they see big visions, and they want people to notice and hear that. They want people to go, oh yeah, no, I get it. I hear what you're saying. And get people excited and inspired. That's what drives them. So you can see that these four core drivers can sometimes be at odds with each other, and they often are. So, you know, yellow's big ideas and big plans. Blue wants to know, okay, well, how is that going to work? Is this even viable? But yellow, that's not what yellow wants to talk about. They don't want to talk about viability. They just want to talk, oh, it's a great idea. It's a big idea. Blue wants to talk about viability. They want to make sure you can get it right. You know, red wants to get things done. And if you get in their way, quite frankly, they're going to run you over and not necessarily apologize, because the goal is to get it done. And if you got in their way, well, that was kind of your fault, not their fault. Whereas green, they don't want anybody to get run over in any circumstance. And if we have to not get something done so that we can make sure everybody feels good and feels comfortable and doesn't get, emotionally hurt in any way, then we're not going to get it done, but we're going to really feel good about being together with each other and feeling good about being a team. And that's the most important part. So you can see how these different core drivers and core motivators can create barriers, and they can create us looking at other people and going, wow, that person's really being difficult. Let's get into some more finer distinctions on what some of these styles need and want. So the blue, they're the get it rights. They're really important, precision and accuracy, and they're very analytical. They're systematic. They want plans. They want to analyze. Without a plan, you can't analyze. You can't find out if you did what you expected to do. They're very detail oriented. So that's blue. Red, the get it done people, or the energies. High expectations of themselves and others, but mostly themselves. They hold themselves to a very high standard of getting things done, of activities and achievements. So high achievers often. They're very decisive. They're presented with information, boom, they make a decision, because you got to get it done, and you can't get it done until you've made a decision. And they're very task focused. Just get the task, get it done. On that decision making, sometimes they're sometimes people will say that they're a ready, fire, aim sort of orientation. That they just want to get going even when they don't even know absolutely what the target is yet. And they're also very efficient. They will get a lot of work done. Unfortunately, they step on toes often when they're doing it, but that's not really that big of a concern for them. It's about getting the work done. The get along energy wants to build consensus, bring people together, get everybody thinking the same way. They're very compassionate about other people and their feelings. They want harmony. They don't like conflict in their world. They're very helping and healing. And if someone's feeling down or someone needs to talk, they're always available for them. They're much more oriented towards small groups rather than large groups, like family, etc. And then we have yellow energy. Wants to get noticed. They're very much oriented towards large groups. They like the more people, the better. They have big visions, big ideas. They see things that other people can't see in terms of, you might say, to use a more of a current vernacular, is the 10,000-foot view on things. They see a lot of what's going on. They're influencers. They get people on board. They get other people excited about things. They're the ones that have a large group of large social circles, and they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can get whatever it is that you need, sort of thing. They're often very high profile, even if they're not like high profile, like political stage or whatever. Within their social group, they're probably the most high profile person or one of within their social group. They tend to hang out with other people who are high profile type people as well. And they're also very passionate. They're very, very passionate about the things that they believe in and the things that they're promoting and want to do. So that's kind of a snapshot of the different 4 styles. So let's get into a little bit more things. So this is the overview, and we'll get into some more specifics about each one. So blue, one of the things that if we're driving change with blue is if change is happening, they need to know why. Why is this change happening? They don't care about a lot of other things until they know why. They can't even think of other things until they know why. They need a plan. You can't have a change. You can't do something different without a plan. We know what we've been doing, how well it was working. We have no idea how this new thing will work unless we create a plan for it. They want systems to systematize everything, and it has to be logical. They will often say, well, that just doesn't make sense. And when they're dealing with a yellow again doesn't even actually need it to make sense right now. They just need to buy in on this big idea, and then we'll work about we'll let someone else make sense of it later. Red, they don't necessarily want to know why. They want to know when. When does this have to be completed by? What is the deadline? They want to know what the result is. So when and the result. Be very specific on what the result is. They don't care about why we're doing it. It really is extraneous to the conversation for them to talk about why. If you start talking about why, they're liable to walk out of the room, quite frankly. I've seen it happen. And they don't care about who, because really the only who that's important on this is them. If other people are able to help, okay, but their experience is mostly other people get in the way. They don't actually help. That's the strongest red energy. And we're talking like really off the scale red and blue when we talk about these. These are the extremes. And they don't want to know how, because again, they already know how. No one's going to tell them how. They've already figured it out. They know how to do it. Green, most important thing is who. Who is going to be involved? Who's on the team? Who's in this project? You know, who does it affect? Those kinds of things. They want the process to be consultative. You know, get everybody's opinion and idea, and make everybody feel like they belong to the process and to the solution, or to the outcome or output. They want to have 100% of the people involved. As I said earlier, they don't want 90 or 95. They want 100, and they want everything to be fair and to be seen as being fair. All right, yellow, they want to know who's involved as well, not just who does it impact. Green is who's involved and who does it impact. Yellow wants to know just who's involved. Who's involved in this project with me? And the more the better. Can we bring more people in? You know, there's only 100 involved right now. Let's make it 200. Have this big vision. They'll often take whatever someone else's vision or idea is and make it bigger. Oh, you know what? If we could sell, you know, these, what if we added on a, you know, an X, or what if we expanded to this other market, that sort of thing. Always bigger vision for things. More, you know, bigger, more, better, all that kind of stuff. And one of their key drivers or metrics is what's the impact? How is this going to affect people? Are people going to notice this? Or, you know, how many people are we going to have impact on? Because the more people we can have impact on, the better. If our initial plan is to, you know, bring it to 1 million people, well, why not 2 then? Why stop at 1 million? You know, get that impact. Okay, let's talk about how they process information, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So I'll go through this quickly. They process it. Blue needs their information very detail oriented. It needs to be very detailed. It needs to be a progression. So if it's one logical thing built on top of another, you've got to present it that way. You can't make leaps of faith or leaps of logic with them. It all has to be there. They want to see it holistic. They want to see every part of it, because if pieces are missing, then, you know, that's not really detailed. And it has to be organized in a way that works for them so that they can digest it and metabolize it. Red, they just want it quick. Bullet points, man. Boom, boom, boom. Pictures if you got them. Charts, that sort of thing. And binary, they like yes or no decisions. It's harder for them, you know, with value judgments and things like that, because there's gradations and so on, and they would rather just say yes or no. Yes, we're going to do it. No, we're not going to do it. All these conversations with the gray areas and gradations are very frustrating for them. Green, to process things, they process through their feelings, which sometimes makes it look like they're processing things very slowly. But it's because they have to feel. Does this feel right or not? You know, and then they make decisions based on that, and they accept information based on that. Relationships, when they process information, they look at, well, how does this impact the relationships that they have with other people, and how does it impact them, and what's that going to do? And their connectedness with other people. Does it impact the connectedness? So when they're processing things, this is the mode or the funnel through which they, or the frame, I guess is a better word, the frame through which they process it. Yellow, they like pictures. Yes, that's their number one thing when they're processing information. They would much rather have a picture than words on a page. Where blue is going to be more happier with the words on a page, because a picture is not definitive enough. Yellow like ideas, so they're like to process big ideas and think about them and talk about them. And again, passion and excitement. They will talk about, oh, this is such an exciting idea. And blue will say, well, you know, tell me about some of the details. Oh no, just see how exciting this is going to be. We're gonna make sure everybody has an X. Everybody in Canada is going to have. I live in Canada, so everybody in Canada is going to have an X. And blue goes, well, how are we going to do that? You know, don't worry about that right now. Just buy into this idea, you know, that sort of thing. So they're often very good at marketing and sales because of that passion and excitement that they bring to it. And they love things to be random, which is completely different, obviously, than blue. Blue likes things to be organized. Yellow actually likes things to be random. It just fits for them. If it gets too organized, it's boring, and they will leave the room with that when things get boring. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. Again, this comes from my experience in working with organizations when there's truly difficult, when people have these difficult relations, using these things about assertiveness, different styles, different ways that we address and process information and think about things and make decisions. If we can shift how we deal with other people on those areas, we will often have much, much better relations. And I also then just caution, I want to go back to what I talked about at the very beginning. It is possible that the type of person you're dealing with is not just a merely difficult person, that they might be a toxic person. And if that's the case, then the strategies are very different. So it's important to make a distinction between that. And one of the ways to do that is to try some of these things and see what happens, and just see if by moving closer towards them or giving them more time to make a decision or giving them their information in a more detailed way or giving them their information in bullet points, does that help or not? And so try some of these things. And it's one way to diagnose whether, the kind of personality types that you're dealing with. So moving forward from that, at the very beginning, I talked about the idea that if we want to make change, then we have to do something different. We can't keep doing the same thing, classic definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So if we're going to get some change, we have to do something different. And so the question that I'm asking you here is, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do based on the information that you heard today? What change are you going to make? And we can't be waiting for other people to make the change. It's going to have to come from us. I'm sorry that I'm the one that has to deliver that message, but it's just the way of the world. So that's really, if you think about what we went back to at the very beginning, we talked about the idea that when people make change, that they do three things. One of them is make a decision about what they're going to do. So that's what I'm asking you here. The second one is they share it with somebody else. So you can do that if you want to share it in the chat or the text, the Q&A box right now. That will then satisfy that. And then the third thing is just to go and do something. So I'm going to encourage you and invite you and advocate that you take those three steps. Decide, tell somebody, and then do something with it. Start planning or start doing next time you're in the presence of that person that you find difficult. See how you can start shifting things. All right, now to the Q&A.